Hello everybody. So for this week we are going to pick up where we left off with curriculum and teaching and learning and move to the next phase of being an administrator, and that's really a logical move toward professional development, because once your curriculum is in place and you have an adequate curriculum, then we can move to actual teaching and student learning. And when we see that not all students are learning adequately or to their potential, then it becomes time for us to move and look at professional development. The goal of professional development is exactly what the name is to help our teachers develop their skills professionally. And it may not just be limited to teachers. Keep in mind that professional development can be done by just about all staff members to improve their jobs, which ultimately, if you think of a school as a system, all the players have a role in the school. And so we can look at it in broad terms and apply professional development to staff members as well. So please don't leave them out. And as we'll see, that's actually a characteristic that we look at in an overall plan for professional development. So what you see here are the two activities that are involved in this. The first is your overall project, which will give you 4 weeks on which to work. And the second one, which is mentioned in your overall project, is really a look at how your district is planning for professional development. So let's actually look at the big project first. This is your professional development project. So let's pull this onto the screen. This has 4 parts to it, and you will do this over the next month. You'll have 4 weeks to complete this activity. And keep in mind, and we'll see this in the presentation for professional development, I like to distinguish between professional development we have and what I would call mandated trainings. Mandated being something given by the state. That you need, I forgot what, you need FERPA training, so we do FERPA training every year. Bloodborne pathogens, everybody has to do bloodborne pathogens every year. Those are things I would call mandated trainings. Okay, I would not call them professional development. Now, you are required in Oklahoma to do 15 hours of professional development, and those mandated trainings become a part of that in just about every district. But what we're concentrating on here really is professional development to make teachers better teachers. And even though I said earlier that you need to consider staff in your overall plans, this activity is looking specifically at teachers. Okay? So with that in mind, let's look at the introduction here. Okay? So for this project, you're going to do 2 activities. They will both concentrate on professional development. The first will become a part of your school administration portfolio and is due in 4 weeks. The second is simply due in 2 weeks, and we'll look very closely at that in just a second. But it also deals with professional development in your building and or district. This is your professional development characteristics and calendar assessment. That's the name of the second one. Okay, the first one is just your plan. So here's what you're going to do. 4 things. Number 1, and this is what you need to be working on over the next month. Part 1, identify an area in your building that involves curriculum development and or instructional delivery that you feel is in need of improvement. Explain why you feel this area is in need of improvement, and then I want you to find data to support your decision that the identified area is in need of improvement, and you include this data in your report under section part 1. Okay? So ultimately, this will most likely deal with some kind of test scores. We can look at state assessments. We can look at district assessments. You could look at grades in your grade book. You know, just keep everything anonymous. We don't want to see names or anything like that. But what's going on you're probably not going to use grades in your grade book because that would be too narrow, but maybe look at a department as a history department or a science department. What do you feel teachers are in need of doing, and how can you see that in the data? For example, let's say you're a science teacher and all the materials you have, the resources, and I include textbook as a resource, so I'm not singling that out as your source, but your textbook along with all your other resources really concentrate on a hands-on activities approach. But you don't do hands-on activities in your science classes, and nobody else does. And so when you look at state assessments, you see that state assessments that are tied to hands-on activities, students are doing rather poorly. Okay, so that's an indication that there's a disconnect there, and you can make that connection by saying, hey, the data here are showing that our students are scoring poor with these activities that involve hands-on learning in science, and we know that nobody's doing it, so maybe this is an area we need to look at. So that's part one. Part two is going and finding your administrator or administrators and talking to teachers about what you found in the data, and ask them their thoughts on, is this an area where we could actually do some professional development? So this is what we would call a mixed methods approach. It's action research at its purest in a way, but it's a mixed methods approach. You're taking the quantitative data in part one, and you're adding qualitative data from interviews in part two. And so in part two then, you would combine the thoughts of these administrators and your co-teachers. It may be all the teachers, it may just be a department group, but you can see how you're narrowing your focus on the people you're talking to based upon what the data tells you the problem is. So those won't take too terribly long for you to do. Part three is really probably going to be the longest by far. Okay, and here in part three, I want you to actually design an in-service project, a professional development project. Okay, I want you to use and talk about how your project is research-based. If you can't find if you're trying to do something and you need research-based to do it and can't find it, let me know. I'll help you find research that supports what you're trying to do. Ultimately, if we can't find any research that supports what we're trying to do, then maybe what we're trying to do isn't valid. Maybe for some reason you have the idea that if we keep all the shades down and all the windows closed and covered so students can't look out, then they'll concentrate more on their work. Kind of sounds somewhat like, well, maybe there's a causation there, maybe not sure, but we want to find research that supports this idea that students should not be able to look outside. Okay, so that's what I want you to look to find research in designing your topic. Ultimately, what you're going to do on that one, I would guarantee, is you're not going to find any research, which means that this is not something you need to spend your time on. Okay, so it's real important that you find some research to back up what you're wanting to do. A very good strong article, or 2 or 3 medium articles to support your ideas that you're wanting to do. Okay, and again, I'll help you do that if need be. In this part, I want you to also talk about timing. How long would this professional development activity last? The cost. How much is it going to cost? People, who's going to do it? You're going to have to bring somebody in. If you do, will you pay them? If you do this after school, how's all this going to work for you as far as cost and time? How are you going to monitor the implementation of this professional development to see if it worked? So there needs to be a place in there for monitoring. And then finally, how would you evaluate the professional development to see if it works. If it is effectively monitored and everybody says yes, it's happening, then how are you going to evaluate whether or not it worked? So all that needs to be a part of this plan. And then the very last thing is simply adding a reflection. Okay, in this whole process, what did you learn about true professional development, what it takes to actually design some professional development, and so forth. So again, you'll have 4 weeks to do this project. It is due on October 15th, 14th, Sunday the 14th at midnight. Now, your other project that's due in 2 weeks also deals with professional development, so let's look at that. That project is, hold on, let me get it. Here you go. This is the characteristics of quality professional development, policy, plans, and programs. This is where you're going to have to look at board policy. Quite often, professional development is generally directed, or the majority of professional development activities are directed by the district. If you live in a large enough district, some sites have some autonomy in how they deal with their own professional development. But a lot of it is done at the district level and district planning. So the first thing I want you to do is see if you have a calendar that your district has provided or your school has provided showing you all the planned professional development activities for the year. That will go here at the bottom. Okay, here's where you're going to put your calendar. Cut and paste it in there, use the snippet tool, and take a picture if it's a PDF and put it in there, but put it all in a single document. Okay. The other thing you're going to do is look at your district policies and look at, in addition to policies, look at anything your district may have concerning professional development. Some larger districts have actual professional development plans. Look in these plans, okay? And these are the 18 characteristics that I use when I work with schools to determine if a professional development program is adequate to meet the needs of teachers and staff in learning. So let's run through the characteristics real quickly. What you're going to do is simply mark either met or not met under a characteristic. Okay, so under policy, do you actually have a policy that directs staff development efforts? Again, many districts do. Some smaller ones may not. Do you have in policy an expectation for professional growth? In other words, do you see places that talk about administrators, whether it's a superintendent, a principal at the building, or it talks about others? Is there an expectation for them to have professional development? Okay. Is there professional development mentioned in policy for all employees? In other words, when you go to your support service section, and quite often this is a separate section than teachers, is there an expectation for your support services to also be provided with professional development? Okay. Quite typically when we have professional development in policy, there's usually one single policy and maybe some supporting policies. But looking at that one single policy, here are some things to consider. When designing, are you asked to use data to guide your professional development? Is it based on careful analysis of data and is data driven? Does the policy state that it provides for system-wide coordination and is a clearinghouse function in place? In other words, system-wide meaning that if you're in a district that's large enough to have multiple sites, do all the sites do this, or do you have autonomy to do different things at their own sites? And a clearinghouse function, where are you going to store all the information about the professional development that you've done? That could include some monitoring and feedback, as we'll see. So that in 5 years, if you come up and realize this sounds like deja vu, we've encountered this, well, let's look at the professional development we've done in the past and see how that was. That's what a clearinghouse function is. I will say most of the places I look at don't have that. Provides the necessary funding to carry out professional development goals. Is there a mention of funding in policy? Okay, if there's no mention of funding, then we can assume that it's obviously going to be funded if it happens, but we would check this as a not met because there's no mention of funding in policy. Has a current plan that provides a framework for integrating innovations related to the mission of the district or your school. But the key thing here is has a plan. Does your policy ask for a plan, or is it kind of more of a fly-by-night, this is what we think we need to do? Okay. 8 is more straightforward, is there a plan or not? 7 would be saying, has a plan that provides the framework for integrating these things into your mission, so there's a link to your mission within the professional development policy. 8 is asking for the actual plan itself. Okay. 9, is it built using long-range planning approach period? When you're looking at the policy or plan you have, can you see that this tends to look toward that long-range planning? You know, it's going to be able to be adjusted as new data come in and show student learning is up or down, changing demographics, looking at student enrollment over a period of time. Are you able to make the adjustments in the professional development to meet those long-range planning demands? Okay. So is that capability in there? Provides for organizational, unit, and individual development in a systemic manner. Organizational, unit, and individual means just that. Organizational is the whole district PD. Unit is your site PD, and then individual is your individual PD. You know, so do you have that ability to have individual professional development? Is that in policy? Not whether or not you have that ability. Is it in policy that you would have that ability? And then last one focuses on organizational change. Staff development efforts are in line to district goals. Is it in policy that when you create staff development that you align it with your district or site goals? Okay, so that we can see that continuation there. So that's all about planning and design. Delivery is the actual delivery based upon research-based approaches that have been shown to create increased productivity. Does the delivery of the PD provide for 3 phases of the change process: an initiation, implementation, and institutionalization? In other words, is there something in policy that talks about the importance of these 3 phases of change in the professional development and how it's delivered? You know, when a new idea is introduced into the district or the building, how is that new idea going to be implemented and followed through? And then ultimately, as that new idea is adjusted, how is it going to become institutionalized and become a part of the culture of the district? Typically, this is one that's also not found in many districts. Is professional development based on human learning and development and adult learning? Typically, I don't find that. Uses a variety of professional development approaches. Again, we're talking about policy here. Does your policy talk about using a variety of approaches? Does your policy talk about follow-up and on-the-job application necessary to ensure improvement? And finally, does your policy have the expectation that each supervisor be a staff developer of staff supervised? I should say staff developer, not stack developer. In other words, if you're an assistant superintendent, you should be supervising and building the capacity of your principals who you oversee. If you're a principal, you should be doing that for your teachers and your assistants and so forth, okay? And the last piece here, and probably one of the most important pieces that is generally left out of all professional development activities, and that's the evaluation. Requires an evaluation and process that is ongoing, includes multiple sources of information, focuses on all levels of the organization, and based on actual change in behavior. How is the professional development going to be monitored and evaluated once it is done? Are principals going to look for things through informal walkthroughs? How will we know if this professional development worked or not? Okay. Once we ensure that it was implemented with fidelity through the monitoring piece, then we're going to evaluate it to know if it worked well or not. And what will be the difference if something works well? That's the evaluation piece. So once you go through and check whether or not you found these things in policy or in your plan, then you're going to come down here and you're going to explain each characteristic. So I would say as you check it, go down and put the explanation. Notice what it says. If you found a policy, in which policy you used for that characteristic, and whether you believe that policy met or did not meet the definition used within the characteristic. So let's say number 1 has policy that directs staff development efforts. We said yes, yes. This is located in board policy 650.1. I'm just making up numbers. This policy specifically states blah, blah, blah. Okay? And that way you can show. So the next one we said fosters an expectation of professional growth. We said no. While board policy 650.1 talked about professional development, there was no emphasis on the need for professional development found in this policy or in any other policies or in any handbooks used. You could also use teachers' handbooks here. A lot of times if you have a teacher handbook, that's where it will talk about the expectation for professional growth. Anyway, so this is the activity that's due in 2 weeks. So you will work through this activity and simply rate these criteria, either met or not met, and then explain your rating and attach a calendar if you have a calendar. So this is just, the purpose of this assignment is to get you focused on the importance of professional development and that it involves planning. It's not just something that can happen if you want it to be effective in what it's meant to do. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of the 2 projects and how you're going to work these projects for the course.